peace is within reach in a matter of weeks.
We hope that President Nixon should not mistake our goodwill for any kind of weakness.
We are going to sign the agreement when the agreement is right.
Information on the political maneuverings of Washington, Hanoi and Saigon will not have trickled to them this far, and the subtleties of President Thieu's opposition to the 9-point peace plan will have escaped them. For them, a ceasefire will only be a reality when they are no longer terrorized by the Viet Cong and when South Vietnamese shells and bombs stop ripping their homes apart.
The soldiers America sent to Vietnam were, on average, the youngest she's ever sent to war.
Pure genocide, pure and clear genocide. That money could be put right into these cities right here.
I think it's very much in accord with Nixon's past insane actions. I think we can expect more of the same.
The ritual of the official peace talks on Vietnam was reenacted in Paris again today for the umpteenth time. No progress was made, not that anyone expected any. If any progress has been made during Dr. Kissinger's 5 days visit to Paris, it was round another table in highly secret surroundings. President Thieu's man came out after today's meeting, his relaxed manner giving no indication that his master's fate hangs in the balance. The communists are believed to be demanding his removal from office as a precondition for any agreement. The Viet Cong delegate, Madam Bin, behaved as if there never had been any secret talks, although the Viet Cong's role in a future coalition government is believed to be another major source of argument. The chief communist delegate wasn't at today's talks. Presumably he was at a last-minute session with Dr. Kissinger. So while the future of the Vietnam War hangs on the outcome of Dr. Kissinger's talks, the charade of the official talks came to an end for another fortnight. The only scrap of information to be gleaned from today's official talks was that the tone of the communist speeches was markedly moderate, although their demands remain as extreme as ever. But throughout the entire proceedings here today, no mention at all was made of the secret talks between Dr. Kissinger and the North Vietnamese negotiators. And that perhaps shows, as clearly as anything, the total unreality of these proceedings here, which are now in their 4th year. Sandy Gore, News at 10, Paris.
The White House doesn't quarrel with the content of the disclosures from Hanoi, but they obviously took Mr. Nixon and Mr. Kissinger very much by surprise. It was 11 hours before Mr. Kissinger called in reporters to make his long statement of the American position. In a sense, he takes agreement for granted, a signing within a matter of weeks, but he doesn't accept that there was ever agreement with Hanoi over a deadline of October the 31st. All that's necessary now, he says, is one more meeting with the North Vietnamese, and he then looks forward not simply to American disengagement, but to active participation in rebuilding a peaceful Indochina.
So this is the situation in which we find ourselves. With respect to Hanoi, we understand its disappointment that a schedule towards the realization of which it had made serious efforts could not be met for reasons beyond the control of any party. But they know, or they should know, and they certainly must know now, that peace is within reach in a matter of weeks, or less, dependent on when the meeting takes place. And that once peace is achieved, we will move from hostility to normalcy, and from normalcy to cooperation, with the same seriousness with which we have conducted our previous less fortunate relationships with them.
The effect of a settlement is going to be as significant in America as it is in Vietnam. The war has split this country. It forced President Johnson out of office, and it's a central issue in this presidential campaign.
And we have been very conscious of the division and the anguish that the war has caused in this country. And one reason why the President has been so concerned with ending the war by negotiation and ending it in a manner that is consistent with our principles is because of the hope that the act of making peace could restore the unity that had sometimes been lost at certain periods during the war. And so that the agreement could be an act of healing rather than a source of new division. This remains our policy. We will not be stampeded into an agreement until its provisions are right. We will not be deflected from an agreement when its provisions are right. And with this attitude, and with some cooperation from the other side, we believe that we can restore both peace and unity to America very soon.
The question is going to be, if peace is possible now, why not 4 years ago? The answer, according to Kissinger, was the Hanoi concession only earlier this month to separate the military ceasefire from the political settlement. For Mr. Nixon's critics, the continuing war is a continuing broken promise. His promise to end it now could conceivably come true before the election. In any case, it can only be to his advantage. Leonard Parkin, News at 10, Washington.
One does not expect to see much evidence in Saigon that the country is nearer to peace than at any time since the long war began. A generation of fighting has made the Vietnamese pessimists. If there is an absence of excitement about the prospect of peace, there is much evidence that the government here is preparing for the event. All this week, thousands of hastily prepared posters have been pasted up on the city buildings. And for the first time in 4 years, since the last peace talks in fact, flags are being sold on the streets as part of the pro-Thieu, pro-loyalist, pro-war campaign. People are expected to display them prominently. Other banners up today endorse President Thieu's demand for a referendum on whether the people want any communist participation in a Saigon government. A referendum under the present law is of course nonsense. To endorse communism by word or by vote is punishable by death. Thieu's propaganda is no less effective than Hanoi's. So it's not surprising that when you stop people in the streets, their arguments tend to be identical. It's simply that if Hanoi really wants peace, it has only to turn around and walk out of South Vietnam. Back up its promise of a ceasefire, they say, by taking its 13 divisions out of the country. Hanoi, they say, is proposing peace terms very favorable to itself in a war that it's far from winning. Left to his own opinion and that of his military advisors, President Thieu can be expected to reject out of hand any new Hanoi proposal. But we know, of course, that any decision which directly involves Washington is not made on his own. If he continues blocking the peace proposals, President Thieu runs the risk of alienating Washington and President Nixon, who can argue in his own terms that he's ended the war and that from then on his responsibility ends. But President Thieu has warned Washington many times this week that a withdrawal of American support here could lead to a bloodshed. It could lead to a spate of intensive Viet Cong activity here in Saigon. It could lead to massive defection in the army, even an attempted coup. And this President Thieu knows the Americans cannot afford, however attractive Hanoi makes its proposals. Michael Nicholson, News at 10, Saigon. The South Vietnamese are now obsessed with flag raising. The 3 red stripes on the yellow background have been hoisted in their thousands this week, not only in Saigon, but in every village and every hamlet under Loyalist control. Earlier, the flag had simply been a symbol of support for President Thieu and his opposition to the ceasefire terms. But now, as more and more people think the ceasefire is inevitable, flags issued by the government now establish those areas under its control. But there are still plenty of areas still in doubt. We came across this roadblock on Highway 1, the road that leads to Cambodia. The communists had taken the villages of Up Chu and Up Dok, only 15 miles from the outskirts of Saigon, and it's the nearest they've managed to come so far in 4 years. In the past 36 hours, there were more than 148 communists attacked throughout the south, more than at any time since the massive Tet Offensive in 1968. There were also 81 shelling and rocket attacks. Most of the attacks have been around the Central Highlands, which is where President Thieu has had to send many of his better divisions. And this is why a handful of snipers dug into bunkers have effectively cut Highway 1 in half. Michael Nicholson, ITN, Highway 1, South Vietnam. Stalemate, are we back to square one?
Muốn hỏi bằng tiếng Anh là nếu như ngày mai mà không ký kết được thì các bà làm gì, sẽ có những tiếp tục nói chuyện với cái Saigon hay không, hay là chúng ta lại quay trở lại thời kỳ bế tắc như trước? Đó là tiếng Anh.
Ngắn hay dài mà vấn đề thiện chí hay là không?
Time is running out. We are already on October 30, and there are only 24 hours left before October 31st. But I think that the question is not whether we have time or not, but whether we have goodwill or not.
Do you think that there is the goodwill still on the part of the Americans to sign?
Mọi sự việc đều chứng tỏ rằng đến giờ thì ông Nixon là không có cái thiện chí đó.
Everything indicates that up to now, President Nixon has not that goodwill.
Is it possible that North Vietnam is prepared to make any further concessions towards the Americans?
We don't see how we can show our goodwill, how else, in another way. And we hope that President Nixon should not mistake our goodwill for any kind of weakness from our part.
There is another round of the peace talks here in Paris on Thursday. Will you be attending?
On last Thursday's session, we have agreed to continue the talks on next November 5th as usual. But now, how things will happen, you'll see how it will happen.
You will see.
You will
We
see.
will see.
After.
I had understood earlier that you had said that you would go on Thursday. I think we had gained the impression you will go.
Yes. But after that,
But after that,
you will see.
yes, I see.
But we are not going to allow an election deadline or any other kind of deadline to force us into an agreement which would be only a temporary truce and not a lasting peace. We are going to sign the agreement when the agreement is right, not one day before. And when the agreement is right, we are going to sign without 1 day's delay.
Along all the important highways that lead to Saigon, impressively large concentrations of South Vietnamese troops maintain the positions they've held during this last week of sporadic communist attacks. But in the last few days, with the exception of the fighting in the Central Highlands 500 miles north of the capital, there has been less and less contact with the communist forces. More and more of the fighting centers around a village which the Viet Cong use as cover and attempt to cut the road. There might be only 1 or 2 snipers there, a Viet Cong suicide squad who know from the start they have no chance of surviving the South Vietnamese ground fire and bombing attacks. No village along any one of the main highways is entirely safe. Many no longer exist, except as ruins. So the drift of refugees away from the countryside to the towns continues. Often, if the journey is long, they'll set up their own camps, anywhere where there is shade for themselves and water for their cattle. Often farmers and their families will ignore the risk and return to their fields for food. They stay just a few hours in the paddy fields cutting rice and threshing it by the roadside. These excursions are brief but essential. They have no other source of food supply but this. There are no government camps they can go to, no government aid they can rely on. Information on the political maneuverings of Washington, Hanoi and Saigon will not have trickled to them this far, and the subtleties of President Thieu's opposition to the 9-point peace plan will have escaped them. For them, a ceasefire will only be a reality when they are no longer terrorized by the Viet Cong and when South Vietnamese shells and bombs stop ripping their homes apart. The near hysteria that has surrounded the ceasefire negotiations in Saigon over the past fortnight has ended. Attention once again has turned to the war. Everyone, of course, has one ear cocked for a further visit by Dr. Kissinger, or further concessions from Hanoi, or even the slightest change of attitude by President Thieu. Everyone, of course, is waiting for the ceasefire, but the longer they wait, the less optimistic they are. Michael Nicholson, News at 10, South Vietnam. Because of the character of this war, because there is no front line, because villages change hands so quickly, many flying the South Vietnamese flag during the day and feeding the Viet Cong at night, that the final decision on who controls what will probably be decided on what is generally called here the leopard spot policy. Under the leopard spot policy, it's decided that at the hour when the fighting has stopped, what is held by the communists will be administered by them, and the areas flying the South Vietnamese flag will be controlled from Saigon. What might look impressive on the map is deceiving. So is the total count of villages held by the communists, because they usually take over only the empty shell. Villagers suddenly become refugees and move out as the communists move in. Not necessarily out of political conviction, but for their own safety. After the bombing and shelling, there is usually very little left to inherit. More often than not, only the name of the village is left. This is what much of post-war South Vietnam will look like. Although some families have begun to move back to the ruins to try and rebuild in between the craters, most of the refugees will never return. These scenes, repeated all over the country, means that the population of South Vietnam is more and more concentrated in the district towns and the cities like Hue, Da Nang and Saigon. In the villages, there is the fear that the Viet Cong will kill those who have actively helped the government forces. It's happened frequently before, especially to the local militia. These volunteer home guards would be high on any Viet Cong list for assassination. There is the same fear in Saigon. Early in the war, the Viet Cong very successfully terrorized the city, and many people are convinced that given an amnesty under the ceasefire, the terrorists would work their way in again. So the fear is not that the communists will win on the battlefields of South Vietnam. People here are afraid that under the present ceasefire terms, the communists, as they see it, will be allowed back onto the streets. And nobody here can be certain, and that must include President Thieu, of any future political independence once the communists are allowed back in. Michael Nicholson, News at 10, Saigon, South Vietnam. In 12 years of war in Vietnam, over 50,000 American soldiers have been killed, over 300,000 injured. So there's obvious relief in the towns and cities and streets of America, streets like this one in Norfolk, Virginia, that the killing may soon come to an end. But the moves towards peace are bringing anything but relief for a small group of families. The families of the prisoners of war. Families like the Mulligans, who live in this house here. The Pentagon has already released details of how it's going to get the prisoners home, an exercise they call egress recap. The latest figures show that 429 men are being held in North Vietnam, with another 114 held in the south and in Laos. One of these men is Captain James A. Mulligan, who joined the Navy in 1944 and was captured on March the 20th, 1966. In 7 years, his wife Louise has received 2 photographs of him, 4 Christmas cards, and 36 letters. She feels she's very lucky. Many families have had much less. Mrs. Mulligan has also just received from the Pentagon an egress recap book, explaining that within 60 days of the signing of a peace agreement, her husband will be transferred first to a reception center in the Pacific, probably Guam, Okinawa, or the Philippines.
Mrs. Mulligan, when you actually see that book, you'll see all the detailed plans for bringing the men home. Looks as though it's really now going to happen. Does it make you very happy and excited?
I'm very happy, but I really am not that excited. You know, we've controlled our emotions for many, many years, and we've had to really kind of withdraw emotionally. Plus the fact that, you know, there have been many times in the last 7 years, at least 4 or 5 that I can remember, where our hopes have really been raised very high. And every time something doesn't come of these, you know, hopeful signs, it gets a little bit more difficult, you know, to bring yourself back up. So I think we've all kind of tempered ourselves, and we're taking a very let's wait and see attitude. I am very disappointed, though, to tell you the truth, that this came out as quickly as it did. And of course it was the North Vietnamese who released the fact and the details of the peace proposals. It has just made it doubly difficult for the families of these men, because had we not been told, you know, that things were really kind of coming to a head, we wouldn't be quite so anxious. And it's kind of just another little bit of cruel thing that I feel has been an undercurrent through this whole thing, really.
Mrs. Mulligan admits she's a little cynical. The strain of coping with 6 boys aged from 10 to 22, the constant worry about what's happening to her husband, all this, she says, has hardened her. Things will obviously change once Louise and Jim Mulligan are together again. The Pentagon booklet advises wives about the reunion by saying, relax, act natural, and be yourself. Mrs. Mulligan says she'll probably dissolve into tears. Jim Mulligan doesn't like tears, she says, but after 7 years he's going to have to put up with them. Michael Brunson, News at 10, Norfolk, Virginia. Martin Prest is one of the youngest old soldiers in America's history. He's also seriously wounded. So he represents a problem that's going to remain in America long after peace is signed. The problem of the young victims of Vietnam. Tell me, Marty, how did this happen?
Well, I was in an infantry platoon stationed on the DMZ in Vietnam, and I was in charge of demolitions, and I was disarming a booby trap, and it blew up.
That was when?
This was in January 1970.
And you've been in hospital roughly how long?
Well, I was in for approximately a year, then I was out for approximately a year and a half, and I'm back right now just for a short stay.
And you will never be able to walk again, obviously?
No, I won't.
You can't do really anything from waist down?
Approximately the waist down, right.
And
T12 level.
And how old are you?
I'm 25.
Would you try to go into the bed for me? How can you manage it the best?
America has a huge state-run organization for ex-servicemen and their families, the Veterans Association. This is a training room at a VA hospital in New York State, one of the 486 hospitals and clinics VA runs. Here, in a mock-up apartment, those who've been nursed back to health are taught how to cope with living outside the hospital. According to VA, the Vietnam War has not been as terrible as other wars, in terms of overall casualty rates, that is. Medical facilities have been better. Fewer wounded soldiers have died. VA estimates that 250,000 Americans who would have died in any previous war survived Vietnam. But that also means that many more soldiers have survived with serious disabilities. This time, for example, there are many more quadriplegics, people, that is, paralyzed not just from the waist down, but from the neck down. As peace gets nearer, America is beginning to assess what the war has done to her. Martin Prast can't forget what it's done to him.
I suppose it's the question that everybody in your position gets asked, but do you feel resentful about the war and about the country that did this to you?
Oh, not really. There's probably two main reasons involved. One of them is I've seen so many individuals that were hurt via car accidents rather than war and be in the same situation. And the other reason is that this type of injury that I had, I should have died, so I feel rather thankful to be alive in this situation than in a pine box.
What do you mean you should have died? You were so seriously hurt that...
Yeah, I had 4 holes through my heart, and I should have bled to death.
The soldiers America sent to Vietnam were, on average, the youngest she's ever sent to war. At 25, Martin Prast, the ex-Green Beret, faces 40, 50, maybe even 60 years in a wheelchair. He's going to need help for the rest of his life, and so are thousands like him. Michael Brunson, News at 10, Castle Point Hospital near New York. Just across the street from the White House, there's a Christmas spectacle, the Pageant of Peace. It's a symbol of the question many Americans are asking this Christmas: is the White House doing the right thing? Can more bombing bring peace to Vietnam?
Pure genocide, pure and clear genocide. That money could be put right into these cities right here, in these black communities in particular, and help educate some of these people and give them some better avenues for earning a living.
Well, I think he doesn't have any other alternative, for the simple fact that I'd like to see our POWs come back, and it seems like that's the only way we're going to get them back, is to show force.
Yeah, well, I think it's Nixon turned his back on the public after the election. I think it's wrong.
You didn't think he was telling the truth?
No.
What happened?
No.
I think it's very much in accord with Nixon's past insane actions. I think we can expect more of the same. And I think that he should be willing at this point to admit that he has made a mistake, to completely withdraw, and to accept any terms that the other side is willing to offer us, because we are obviously, and have definitely been all along, very much in the wrong.
I think it's a lousy Christmas present to the people over there, but I think the president has to conduct the negotiations the way he sees fit. There isn't really much we can do about it, I guess.
Among all the tinsel and the glitter and the pre-recorded music of this Christmas in Washington, this perhaps is one of the most moving things that I've seen. It's a little note pinned on one of these Christmas trees, and it says simply, "Cannot sleep in peace while we bomb and bomb, only to raise the number of prisoners of wars and missing in actions." Michael Brunson, News at 10, Washington.